Hey guys, welcome back to another calm and cozy story. Just relax, close your eyes, and let the past gently unfold the royal past and uncover a strange tradition. Why did kings and queens choose to marry their own blood? Let's begin. You're lying in your bed, the world slowing down, and far, far back in time, a royal palace begins to shimmer into focus. It's a time where power isn't just about armies or gold. It's about blood. Not the blood spilled in battle, but the blood that runs through royal veins. For centuries, kings and queens believed that their bloodline was sacred, pure, chosen by gods. And anything that threatened to dilute that royal blood was seen as a direct attack on their legitimacy. Sounds dramatic? It was. And to protect their power, they made a decision that seems unthinkable today. They married their own siblings. Not just once or twice, but generation after generation. And surprisingly, it wasn't considered disgusting or dangerous back then. In fact, it was a strategy. A royal strategy to keep the crown within the family, quite literally. Let's walk through the logic they followed, as strange as it might sound now. Imagine you're a young king, freshly crowned. You rule over an empire, but your enemies are waiting, foreign kingdoms, angry nobles, even your own cousins who want the throne. You need allies. But more than that, you need loyalty, people who will never betray you. People whose interests are tied to yours in every way. So what do? You look to your sister. She shares your blood, your house, your family name. And if you marry her, the next heir is doubly royal. There's no chance of a rival dynasty slipping in through marriage, no chance of a foreign prince using your daughter to claim your throne. Simple, clean, and, well, deeply disturbing. But in that time, power meant survival. And emotions had little place in royal chambers. Ancient kingdoms weren't like modern democracies. There were no elections. No ballots. Only blood. Royal blood was everything, a symbol of divine right, godly favor, and eternal rule. So, protecting it became an obsession. The ancient Mesopotamians believed kings were chosen by the gods. The Egyptians took it even further, believing their pharaohs were gods themselves, which meant their offspring had to be semi-divine, and to stay divine, they had to marry inside the family. To marry an outsider was like letting a mortal taint the blood of a god. So, if you're a pharaoh, you don't look for a bride from a neighboring kingdom. You marry your sister. Or half-sister. Or sometimes even your daughter. Yes. It happened. Because to them, it wasn't just marriage, it was preservation. Preserving the line. The myth. The power. Now here's something even stranger. In many of these societies, marrying your sibling wasn't illegal, it was expected. Commoners couldn't do it, but royalty? They had their own rules. They lived above the law, literally and symbolically. In fact, not marrying your royal sister might be seen as weakness, a sign that you were giving in to foreign influence or abandoning tradition. So it became more than just a family arrangement. It became a political weapon. And the more pure the royal bloodline became, the more tightly that power stayed locked in the family vault. But of course, bloodlines aren't like treasure chests. You can't keep closing the lid without consequences. As we'll explore in the coming chapters, this obsession with purity led to problems. Genetic disorders, infertility, mental instability. But in the beginning, none of that mattered to them. They weren't looking generations ahead. They were looking at now. Survive today. Rule today. Protect the crown today. And to do that, they believed one thing with full conviction: royalty must marry royalty. Even if it means marrying your sister. So tonight, as you close your eyes and drift into ancient halls of marble and gold, imagine a place where kings wore leopard skins, queens wore cobra crowns, and wedding vows were whispered between brother and sister, not out of love, but out of loyalty. Strange, isn't it? But this was only the beginning. Because if you thought Egypt was wild, wait until you meet the Habsburgs. Alright, now that we've entered the world of royal bloodlines, it's time to meet the OGs of sibling marriage, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. Let's go back 3,000 years. Imagine the golden sands of Egypt stretching endlessly under a blazing sun. A massive temple stands tall, carved with symbols of snakes, falcons, and suns. Priests whisper in incense-filled halls, and crowds gather to see a living god walk by. That living god? He's the pharaoh. But he's not just a king. He is believed to be the earthly son of Ra, the sun god himself. Which means his blood isn't just royal, it's divine. And divine blood doesn't mix with commoners. In fact, even noble women aren't cleaner enough. So who does the pharaoh marry? His sister. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where sibling marriage wasn't considered scandalous, it was the sacred norm. Many Egyptian dynasties, especially during the New Kingdom period, practiced royal incest as a way to protect divine blood and keep the godly line unbroken. Let's talk examples, and they're wild. Crown King Tutankhamun, yes, the famous boy king, with the golden mask and the mysterious tomb. He was the product of incest. DNA testing in 2010 revealed that his parents were full brother and sister. And guess what? Tutankhamun himself married his half-sister, Ankhesenamun. Their 2 daughters, sadly, both stillborn, were also found mummified in his tomb. Tut had several health problems, including a cleft palate, a club foot, and likely malaria, all signs of inbreeding consequences. But at the time, none of this stopped the tradition. Why? Because their belief system was more powerful than biology. Crown Cleopatra's family. Now let's jump forward a bit, to Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt. Her family, the Ptolemies, were Greek rulers who took over Egypt after Alexander the Great's death. But they didn't just conquer Egypt, they adopted Egyptian traditions. And that included sibling marriage. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII, married his own sister. Cleopatra herself? She married 2 of her brothers during her reign, Ptolemy XIII and later Ptolemy XIV, though she had famous affairs with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Still, her official royal marriages were with her brothers, because that's what the crown required. Power came first. Feelings didn't matter. So why did Egyptians think this was okay? Let's break down their logic. 1. They believed their pharaohs were gods, part human, part divine. 2. Gods in Egyptian mythology often married siblings. Isis married Osiris. Nut married Jeb. So, human rulers followed the same divine pattern. 3. Purity mattered more than health. A pure bloodline symbolized a stable kingdom. Now, this didn't mean every Egyptian married their sibling, common people definitely did not. In fact, marriage between full siblings was illegal for regular citizens. But royalty? They were above the law, literally and spiritually. The royal family became a tight circle, generation after generation marrying within itself. And slowly, things began to break. You can only bend nature so far. Scientists studying royal mummies have found skeletal deformities, dental issues, and genetic abnormalities, all pointing to the dangers of incestuous unions. But the pharaohs didn't stop. Because in their mind, the risk of political instability was far more terrifying than a limp or a lisp. As long as the crown stayed in the family, Egypt would stand strong. Even if it meant the family itself was falling apart on the inside. It's hard to imagine now, a grand throne room where a king plans his wedding to his sister like it's the most natural thing in the world. But to the pharaohs, it was natural. It was destiny. It was power. It was protection. And so, for centuries, brother and sister stood side by side, not just as siblings, but as husband and wife. They ruled together. They prayed together. They were even buried together. And the people watched, accepted it, and believed, because that's what divine royalty looked like. Tonight, as you lie still and drift further into sleep, imagine the Great Pyramids under the stars. A golden sarcophagus sealed inside a tomb. And inside, a royal couple, not strangers, not lovers, but siblings who once ruled a kingdom as gods among men. It's strange. It's dark. It's real. And this was only Egypt. Now that we've wandered through ancient Egypt's golden tombs, let's open the heavy wooden doors of medieval Europe. Where kings didn't just wear crowns, they wore family trees like armor. Europe was a different world. Cold stone castles, flickering candlelight, and halls echoing with footsteps of nobles, lords, and ladies in heavy robes. Unlike the deserts of Egypt, Europe's royalty didn't claim to be gods, but they still thought their blood was sacred. And protecting it? That was everything. So instead of marrying their sisters outright, they found clever ways to stay in the family. They married their cousins, nieces, even uncles in some cases. Because in royal Europe, dynasty mattered more than DNA. Let's start with a family name you've probably heard before, the Habsburgs. Ah yes, the legendary ruling house of Austria and Spain. The Habsburgs were masters of political marriage. Their motto? Let others wage war, you, lucky Austria, marry. And oh, did they marry? Not outsiders. Not strangers. But each other. Uncles married nieces. First cousins became husbands and wives. Second cousins weren't even considered distant. And every generation, the same names repeated: Charles, Ferdinand, Maria, Philip, over and over again, stitched into one single giant family web. But why did they do this? Let's pause and think. Imagine you're a king in 1500. You rule a vast land. You want to keep control. If your daughter marries a French prince, that prince might claim your throne. Risky. But if she marries your nephew? Or cousin? Power stays in the family. No land lost. No bloodline broken. No threats. Simple strategy, high stakes. This wasn't just an Austrian thing. The Spanish royals did it. The French Bourbons. Even England got involved with cousin marriages. Over and over. Here's the logic they followed. 1. Political unity, marrying relatives kept territories connected. 2. Loyalty, a cousin is less likely to rebel than a stranger. 3. Legacy, fewer families involved meant tighter control of succession. It was all about preserving control. No one wanted a stranger's child sitting on their throne one day. But this strategy had side effects. Real, visible, dangerous ones. The Habsburgs, for example, developed a condition now known as the Habsburg jaw, or a protruding lower jaw, thick lips, and difficulty speaking or chewing. Over time, it wasn't just physical. Some royal children were born with mental disabilities, infertility, or simply didn't survive infancy. And yet, the marriages continued, because to these monarchs, dynasty outweighed danger. One of the most tragic examples? Charles II of Spain. Born in 1661, Charles was the product of 16 generations of inbreeding. He was physically disabled, mentally challenged, and emotionally unstable. He couldn't speak properly until he was 4. Couldn't walk until he was 8. He was king, but barely functioning. And the irony? He had no heirs. The bloodline he was supposed to protect ended with him. But no one changed the system. Because for centuries, the system was the power. European royalty also had something Egypt didn't: the church. And sometimes, the church raised an eyebrow at these close marriages. According to Catholic canon law, marriages between close relatives were prohibited, at least on paper. But if you were a king or queen, you could get a special dispensation, a permission slip from the Pope to marry your cousin or niece. That's right, religious approval could be bought or persuaded. So while the church preached purity, it often stayed silent or supportive. Now you might wonder, didn't common people question this? They did. Sometimes, but most of the population was illiterate. Most lived hard lives, far from castles. And royalty was considered above question, chosen by God. Plus, royal marriages weren't public love stories. They were private deals, sealed with signatures, coins, and the occasional awkward portrait. And if the child of a royal marriage was sickly or strange, it was chalked up to the mystery or God's will, not genetics. So as centuries passed, castle after castle repeated the same pattern: a noble daughter sent off to marry her cousin. A young prince pledged to his aunt's daughter. Thrones passed hand to hand, family to family, but always within the circle. To them, the world outside the family was chaos. And keeping it all blue-blooded, even if the price was deformity, felt safer than inviting strangers in. As you drift tonight, picture an old castle on a hill. Rain tapping the stone walls, a royal feast glowing under chandeliers. And seated at the head table, a couple bound not by love, not by romance, but by blood, duty, and centuries of fear. A prince and his cousin. A queen and her nephew. A family that saw the world not as a wide, open field, but as a small garden with very tall walls. And inside those walls? Only their own blood was allowed to grow. So far, we've seen why royal families kept marrying their own. But what happens when you keep doing that for centuries? Let's talk about the face of royal inbreeding, literally. It's a cold morning in 16th century Europe. Inside a massive stone castle, the royal painter adjusts his brush. He's about to create a portrait of the most powerful man in Europe, Emperor Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire. The emperor sits still, dressed in layers of gold and velvet. But there's something about his face. A sharp, jutting lower jaw. A thick underbite. His lips don't quite close. The painter stares. The courtiers pretend not to notice. But the world would remember it forever. This is the beginning of the Habsburg jaw. The Habsburg family wasn't just any royal house. They were the royal house, ruling Austria, Spain, Hungary, and the Holy Roman Empire. Their influence stretched across Europe like a spiderweb. And at the center of that web? A family tree that looked more like a circle, because generation after generation, the Habsburgs married their own cousins, uncles, and nieces. Not once. Not twice. But for hundreds of years. And that decision had a price, one written right into their faces. Let's break down what the Habsburg jaw really was. Medically, it's called mandibular prognathism, when the lower jaw sticks out beyond the upper jaw. In the Habsburgs, it was extreme. So extreme, in fact, that by the time Charles II of Spain came around, it was said he couldn't chew food properly, spoke with difficulty, and drooled in public. Imagine that, the most powerful man in Spain, unable to close his mouth or pronounce his words clearly. Not because of illness or accident, but because his family tree had no branches. Scientists later analyzed Habsburg portraits across generations. From paintings alone, they could see the facial transformation, generation after generation. The jaw became longer, the chin larger, and the lips heavier. It wasn't just visual. Modern studies, including one from 2019, confirmed that the Habsburgs had extraordinarily high levels of inbreeding, some members with genetic similarity equal to that of a child from sibling parents. That's intense. Even in the world of royalty, it was extreme. Let's look at Charles II of Spain again, the tragic symbol of this pattern. Born in 1661, he was the last Habsburg ruler of Spain. He was physically weak, had intellectual disabilities, and reportedly couldn't walk until he was 8. He suffered frequent seizures, chronic infections, and possibly infertility. Despite being married twice, he had no children. He was so unwell that many thought he was cursed, that someone had used witchcraft to make him this way. But the truth was written in his genes. He was the result of too many generations of marrying within the family. Here's something eerie. The royal family had every resource, money, doctors, food, palaces. But they couldn't escape the one thing they feared the most, the consequences of their own traditions. They had kept the crown, but at what cost? Their bloodline was pure, but fragile. Their faces, once considered noble, became known for deformity. Their minds, once sharp with strategy, became clouded with illness. But why didn't they stop? Why not marry outside the family and refresh the gene pool? Because royalty feared outsiders more than they feared nature. An outsider could bring rebellion. A foreign queen might side with her old kingdom. A rival bloodline might threaten the throne. So they chose to keep it safe, even if that meant marrying someone with the same grandparents. It was a dangerous illusion of control. Imagine this, a royal wedding banquet in Madrid. The bride and groom are both young. Both dressed in the finest silks. Both smiling nervously under candlelight. They also happen to be first cousins. Everyone in the room knows it. No one blinks. To them, this is tradition. This is duty. This is normal. And so the music plays. The toasts are made. And the family tree curls inward, tighter and tighter. What's even more tragic is that Charles II's death marked the end of the Spanish Habsburgs. There was no one left who wasn't too sick, too young, or too closely related to take the throne. In the end, their obsession with bloodline protection destroyed the very bloodline they were trying to protect. And with Charles's death came a European war over succession, as other royal houses fought to claim the now vacant Spanish crown. So, in trying to keep power in the family, the Habsburgs lost it all. Tonight, as you settle in and close your eyes, imagine that royal face in a dim portrait hall. A sharp jaw, a heavy brow, a silent reminder of how far tradition can go when no one dares to question it. The Habsburgs left behind castles, gold, and legends. But they also left behind a warning. And in the next chapter, we'll see just how little love had to do with royal marriages. So far we've talked about kings and queens marrying siblings, cousins, and nieces. But now it's time to ask something important. Did love ever matter at all? Let's rewind to a quiet chamber deep inside a medieval castle. A young princess, barely 14, sits by a stained glass window. Her ladies-in-waiting whisper behind her. She's dressed in a gown she didn't choose, about to marry a man she's never met. And that man? He's her cousin from a kingdom far away, handpicked by her father, the king. No candlelit proposal. No romantic letters. No choice. This isn't a love story. It's a contract. For royal families, marriage was business. A deal between kingdoms. A way to swap land, promise peace, or claim thrones. It wasn't about feelings. It was about strategy. Love was a luxury they simply couldn't afford. And most of them never even hoped for it. Let's take a moment to think like a king. You have 4 daughters. Your enemies surround you. Your allies are flaky. Your treasury is thinning. What's your best move? You marry your daughters off to neighboring princes, dukes, even uncles, to seal peace treaties and gain influence. It doesn't matter if she cries. It doesn't matter if he's 40 years older. What matters is that this match gives you power. And it wasn't just daughters. Princes, too, were pawns. Royal sons were often promised in marriage before they could even speak. Betrothed at age 3. Married at 14. Crowned at 18. Some met their future spouses for the first time on their wedding day, confused, nervous, expected to rule together instantly. And yet, to the outside world, it all seemed elegant. Romantic. Regal. But behind the silks and ceremonies, it was pure politics. Let's explore some real examples. Ring Marie Antoinette married at age 14 to Louis XVI of France. Not because they fell in love, but because Austria needed a strong alliance with France. She was sent away from her home forever, renamed, retrained, and dropped into the chaos of Versailles. Love? Hardly. She struggled for years in a cold, awkward marriage that only later became affectionate, and even that couldn't save her from the guillotine. Ring Catherine of Aragon originally married to Prince Arthur of England. He died young. Then, she was married to his younger brother, Henry VIII, to maintain the alliance between Spain and England. Years later, that marriage ended in disaster when Henry couldn't get a male heir, triggering the English Reformation, the creation of the Church of England, and 6 more marriages for Henry. Love? Not even close. It was all about succession, power, and politics. Even the wedding night, the moment we think of as deeply personal, was often a public ritual. In many royal courts, the bride and groom were escorted to bed by noblemen and ladies, and sometimes even watched over to confirm the marriage was consummated. That's right, there was no privacy. Because a royal marriage wasn't just a wedding. It was a state event, and the entire kingdom had a stake in it. And if love ever did happen by accident, it was often discouraged or punished. Kings who fell for commoners were seen as weak. Queens who loved outside the court faced exile or worse. Because love could ruin the plan. It could lead to scandal. Illegitimate heirs. Risky choices. Divorce. And the last thing a royal family wanted was a surprise. So how did they cope? Many royals lived double lives. They had their arranged spouses for political duty. And secret lovers for emotional comfort. In some cases, kings kept multiple mistresses in palaces, given titles, homes, and even children. Queens, on the other hand, had far less freedom. If they strayed, it was treason. Dangerous. Even fatal. Let's pause for a moment and breathe. Imagine being born into a palace, gold ceilings, velvet beds, armies at your command, but never allowed to choose who you love. Never allowed to marry someone who makes you laugh. Never allowed to be just a person, instead of a symbol. That's the quiet tragedy of royalty. From the outside, it looked like privilege. From the inside, it often felt like prison. And yet, most of them accepted it. Because love wasn't part of the royal curriculum. They were raised on duty, honor, bloodlines, alliances. They knew from childhood that marriage was a move on the chessboard, not a walk in the garden. And if it ever worked out peacefully, that was just luck. So as you lie back tonight, picture a candlelit wedding in a grand cathedral. A young bride walking slowly toward a groom she barely knows. Crowds cheering. Trumpets blaring. But inside, two strangers exchange vows not for love, but for land. For treaties. For names. For blood. And maybe, if they're lucky, for something that feels like peace. We've seen how royal marriages weren't built on love, but on blood, strategy, and control. But there's another powerful player we haven't talked about yet. The church. And their silence was louder than we think. In medieval Europe, two forces ruled over people's lives: crown the crown, kings, queens, emperors cross-hash the church, popes, bishops, saints, and while one held swords, the other held souls. They were both powerful. Both feared. And often, both wanted the same thing: control. But when it came to royal incestuous marriages, these two didn't always agree. Let's walk through the quiet war between crowns and crosses. First, understand this: the church wasn't fond of inbreeding. In fact, the Catholic Church had clear rules on who could and couldn't marry. Starting around the 4th century and tightening over time, the church forbade marriage between close relatives, cousins, uncles, and nieces, siblings, all off limits. So technically, many royal marriages were against church law. But here's the twist: when a king wanted to bend the rules, the church often let him. How? Through a magical little piece of paper called a dispensation. A dispensation was special permission from the Pope himself that said, yes, we know they're cousins, but we're going to allow it anyway. These dispensations were handed out like royal favors. If a king promised support, sent gold, or helped the Vatican politically, suddenly the rules weren't so strict anymore. Nephew-niece marriage? Approved. Double cousins? Sure, why not? In some cases, the church looked the other way entirely, pretending the couple wasn't closely related at all. This created a strange dynamic. On Sundays, preachers told commoners that cousin marriage was a sin. But by Monday, a royal cousin couple had just gotten married with the Pope's blessing. For the public, it was confusing. For royals, it was convenient. And for the church? It was a game of influence. The Pope didn't want to make enemies of kings, especially not the kings who controlled armies, land, or taxes. So instead of fighting royal inbreeding, the church quietly became part of it. Let's take an example. Ring Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon. You know them as the Catholic monarchs of Spain, the ones who funded Columbus and unified Spain. But did you know they were second cousins? Their marriage should have been illegal under church law. But they requested a papal dispensation and got married anyway. Without it, the unification of Spain might not have happened. So once again, power overrode doctrine. Another case? Ring Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. Catherine was first married to Henry's older brother, Arthur. When Arthur died, Henry wanted to marry her instead. Church law said this was forbidden. A man marrying his brother's widow was against scripture. But Henry got a special dispensation from the Pope. Years later, when Henry wanted a divorce, he used that same marriage to accuse the church of corruption, triggering a massive religious split. So you see? One royal marriage, one quiet permission, changed the entire future of England. But not everyone in the church agreed with this silence. Some monks, priests, and reformers spoke out against royal inbreeding. They warned of health problems, political instability, and moral decay. But their voices were often drowned out. Because no matter how loudly the church preached, kings had crowns, and crowns could crush. So the church backed off. Sometimes they whispered. Sometimes they blessed. But rarely did they resist. It wasn't just Catholicism, either. In Orthodox Christianity, cousin marriage was also frowned upon, but exceptions were made for royal families. In Islamic empires, cousin marriage was more accepted culturally, but even there, royal unions were chosen for power, not passion. Across cultures, one pattern held strong: electric light bulb. The closer the crown, the looser the rules. The church may have shaped public morality, but the royals shaped the church's behavior. Now picture this: a stone cathedral glowing with candles. A bishop reads wedding vows aloud. A royal couple stand side by side, cousins, maybe even closer, dressed in white and gold. Behind them, a pope's letter approving their union. The crowd claps. The choir sings, and the priest who questioned it? He's been reassigned. Far away. Because power decides what's holy, not always scripture. And here's the deeper irony. The church often taught that marriage was sacred. That it should be built on love, respect, and faithfulness. But for centuries, the most sacred marriages, the royal ones, were built on strategy, silence, and sacrifice. All approved. All endorsed. All swept quietly under a velvet rug. As you rest tonight, think of the invisible tug-of-war between palace and pulpit. A battle not of swords, but of scrolls and secrets. Where holy men stood before kings, sometimes to bless, sometimes to beg, and often just to survive. Because in the world of royalty, even faith had to kneel. As we reach the end of this royal tale, let's step forward in time and see how this dark tradition slowly crumbled, or did it? Let's explore how the royals let go of their bloodlines, and whether they really ever did. It's the 19th century. Europe is buzzing with change. The world is no longer the same. Revolutions are breaking out in France, America, and even Russia. Science is making new discoveries about the world, and even about genetics. And in the middle of this, royal families are being forced to reconsider something they once saw as sacred: their family trees. What once seemed like the only way to ensure purity and power, marrying inside the family, was now being questioned, both by outsiders and by the royals themselves. Let's start with one of the most famous royal families of all time, the Habsburgs. By the 1800s, centuries of incestuous unions had caused so much damage to their gene pool that they were left with only one option: stop marrying within the family. But it was too late. Broken heart Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg monarch, had died childless, leaving no direct heirs. His reign marked the end of the Habsburg Empire in Spain, and his death triggered a war between European powers fighting for control of Spain. The empire was divided, and the Habsburgs, known for their jaw, their illnesses, and their infighting, had finally lost their grip on Europe. It wasn't a romantic breakup, it was a political collapse. So, in the aftermath of this royal chaos, what happened? Europe's royals began to adjust. No more incestuous marriages. No more sibling weddings. For a while, marriages were about political alliances, but the focus shifted. In the late 19th century, scientific understanding of genetics started to challenge old royal customs. Scientists began to recognize the dangers of repeated incest, including the mental, physical, and emotional toll it took on royal families. And slowly, as medical knowledge improved, royals started to shift away from the tradition of marrying family members. The result? The blue-blooded monarchs of Europe began marrying outside their circles. Ring Queen Victoria of England, known as the Grandmother of Europe, was one of the first to begin this trend. She married Prince Albert, a cousin, but then her children married into different European royal families. This created alliances that extended beyond the royal bloodlines, connecting England to Germany, Russia, and Spain. For the first time, royal families began to look outward, seeing the advantages of global alliances rather than tightly holding on to their bloodlines. But let's not be too hasty to assume everything changed. Even in the 20th century, royal families didn't completely break free from their old ways. Take a look at Prince Charles of Wales and Princess Diana. Their marriage was a high-profile union, but even this famous royal wedding wasn't immune to the pressures of tradition. While the public believed it was a love match, behind closed doors, the marriage was about more than romance. It was about preserving the royal line, just like the marriages of past centuries. And even today, if you look at the British royal family, you'll find traces of old traditions. While William and Kate are not first cousins, they are still related through shared aristocratic lineage. The idea of keeping things within a specific class or bloodline hasn't completely disappeared. So, did the tradition die? Not completely. Yes, the royals married outside their families, but they still cling to their privilege and heritage. The lesson? Power isn't just about bloodlines anymore. It's about perception. And perception is as powerful as ever in today's world. Even if royals are no longer marrying siblings, they still marry to preserve power, whether that power is political, social, or symbolic. The modern royals have learned from the past and reformed, but they still keep the old family ties, not just for blood, but for influence, for the legacy of the crown. And as you drift off to sleep tonight, picture one last royal wedding, a beautiful gown, a dazzling crown, a procession of lords and ladies. But this time, no one talks about blood. They talk about the future. Because in the end, even the most ancient traditions give way to the future. And perhaps, in time, even the oldest royal families will realize power isn't just inherited through blood. Sometimes, it's built from love, from change, from progress. And that, well, that's the real legacy of royalty. Thanks for watching. If you like, hit subscribe button for more history secrets like this, and also like, share and do comment for next video.